All right, and just like in Hamilton, the show, the world did turn upside down. Okay, so chapter 6, we're going to get into this brand new nation we call the United States of America and talk about all the impacts of just that. All right, so we're going to see how this new republic is tested. So we fast forward through the war as we previously talked about in last chapter. We don't really talk about battles too much. That's, if you're really into that, you can look them up on your own. I left just some information on the last PowerPoint. So here we go. The Treaty of Paris, 1783. The big bad British, they sign this Treaty of Paris. They give up. They relinquish their colonies in the Americas. No one saw this coming. Crazy, crazy stuff. So what does the Treaty of Paris of 1783 say? Now remember, I emphasize 1783 on purpose because if you do remember, 2 chapters ago, we talked about the Treaty of Paris of 1763, which ended what war? The French and Indian War. Okay, so now this is the second one, the 1783 Treaty of Paris. So a couple things you need to know that it does. It obviously allows us to become an independent nation. The Mississippi River is our western boundary for now. We have some fishing rights off the coast of Canada, cool, and American debts to the British merchants will have to be, paid for. All right. So this is the Treaty of Paris of 1783. This is the British giving up to the scrappy young colonies. All right. So what are the impacts of the revolution? There are many. There are social, political, and economic impacts of this revolution. So first off, let's try to remember the women. We always try to talk about women's history and where we are and what they're doing during these time periods. So women are very, very important during the revolution and obviously thereafter. So women during the revolution, believe it or not, many of them were helping out. They were manning the farms and the businesses while their husbands had gone off to the war. Some of them became very involved being nurses and cooks and helping the soldiers on the battlefields. And then you have women like Abigail Adams, who is the wife of the future president at this point, John Adams, who is like your women's rights activist during her day. Now, she doesn't exactly jumpstart a movement or anything like that, but she's certainly aware that women need rights during this time period. They need more equality than they're given because they've done so much during the revolution. So when the Constitutional Convention is underway, and we'll talk about what that means in a little bit, Abigail Adams is going to tell her husband John, hey, listen, when you go, remember the ladies, okay? When you're writing that Constitution, remember the ladies. Don't forget about us. And then John goes off to the Constitutional Convention, and he forgets the ladies. We'll see what that means later on. So what's women's role during this time period? What are they expected to do? Where are they in society? We use a term to describe the expectations of women in our society at this time. It's called Republican motherhood. And I must stress this term big time because this is a term in any women's rights essay, which again is a very popular topic for the exam in May. Any essay having to do with women, you want to always scope the entire history of women. And your essay, in this case, even if it's asking about women's history in the 20th century, you would probably start your essay talking about Republican motherhood, saying how far women have come since then. So then what is Republican motherhood? Republican motherhood means that women during this time period, they're expected to stay at home and to raise the children to become good Republicans, okay? This is Republican motherhood. You must know it, okay? We'll bring this up time and time again throughout the year. What about Native Americans? Where are they in all of this? They did fight on both sides. Most of them fought on the British side because the British promised them their land back if they won. Obviously, that doesn't happen too well for them. Unfortunately, the Iroquois, a tribe that we talked about from chapter 1, they kind of get divided after this war. So things aren't looking good for them. What else? African Americans also very involved in the war. Many of them fought in the Continental Army. Many of them were promised their freedom if they fought. That's interesting. We will see some northern, like the New England and middle states now, no longer colonies. They're going to pass what we call emancipation laws. So, for example, you don't have to know this Pennsylvania gradual emancipation law, but it's an example of gradual emancipation. What does emancipation mean? Freedom, gradual freedom. What it means is your child, if you're a slave, if you birth a child, that child is now born free. And obviously, as time passes, as those slaves die out, their children are born free. There is no longer slavery, okay, decades down the road once all of those children are born from the slaves. That's what many of these middle and New England states will do. Southern states, not so much. Okay, slavery is protected by the Constitution, and we'll see what that means more in a little bit. Okay, so America's first constitution is a little bit different than what we have today. We do not have the constitution we have today right at the beginning. Our first constitution is called the Articles of Confederation. Okay, the Articles of Confederation, created in 1777. It's a loose alliance. It basically is a weak government because it gave more power to the states. It does not have a three-branch system like we do have today. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But it was a very loose alliance, and I must stress that. And you must know that the Articles of Confederation was very weak because it gave more power to the states. We'll see why that is coming up. So what does the Articles of Confederation do right? Because we're going to talk more about the failures of the Articles more than the positives, the successes. So some of the successes, and there's not many, is what you see right here. There's two things that are passed during the Articles of Confederation time, the Land Ordinance Act of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance. Now, on the map there, what you can see is it establishes these future states. It basically sets a precedent of how territories would become states. So it gives guidelines, essentially, of how a territory has the ability to become a state, you need X amount of people, etc. So that's not much of a success, but that is one thing that we do accredit the Articles of Confederation with. It also did ban slavery, these laws, in that green area. Okay, those states that you see make sense because they're kind of on the northern side of the U.S. And those are the biggest successes. All right. Anything else they did right? Yes, they did end the war. That was the government. It does set up our first government, and we start to send diplomats to other countries. But that's it. Okay, so let's talk about the problems now, the issues. One, I already mentioned, states have too much power. Two, there's only one branch of government. There's no legislative branch. That means there's no Congress. There is no executive branch. There's no one solid leader. Okay, there's no regulation on money. There's no way to collect taxes. And so the economy is just going to be horrible in the beginning. Okay, things are not going well for this brand new United States. They certainly are not united, but they're united in name only. Okay, so let's talk about one of the things that leads to the end, or the revision, I should say, of the Articles of Confederation, and that would be Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion occurs in Massachusetts. Okay, the Articles of Confederation is, enabled. It's, ongoing. It's our government at this time, and these farmers in Massachusetts, they are upset because of taxes. Well, that makes sense because remember, we just fought a war over taxes. So this new government is now needing to make money. They have to pay for things, infrastructure, and they're going to need to, collect taxes from the people. And a lot of people were like, wait, I don't want to pay taxes. I thought that was the whole reason for this war. Well, spoiler alert, you need taxes. A government needs tax money in order to pay for many things besides their employees. Like I said, infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. So the farmers in Massachusetts, they're like, not having it. They rebel. They refuse to pay the taxes. They're led by a former veteran from the Revolution named Daniel Shea. And this is an issue, this rebellion, because there is no national army. Okay, they don't have an executive. They don't have They called George Washington. They're like, hey, listen, man, thanks for the revolution. That was a really good time. You're the man and everything. By the way, can you put down this rebellion for us? Washington's like, dude, I am not in any position of this government. There's no president. There's no such thing just yet. There is no national army. They don't have the money to pay an army or raise an army. So he says, I'd love to help you, but I can't. Thankfully, the rebellion is put down by local militia. So what do we take away from Shays' rebellion? What we take away from Shays' rebellion is that this brand new government, the Articles of Federation, is way too weak. Something has to happen. We have to alter it. We have to change it. We have to make it better. So that leads us to the Constitutional Convention. Okay, the colonies are meeting. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so the Constitutional Convention, we have another example of when all of the colonies, well, now states, are now going to meet. And what you see here is disunity. Not everybody's on the same page, and that's been a constant theme from all the way back to the Revolutionary era. So why are they meeting? They don't know that they're meeting to write a constitution. The purpose that they originally got there to do was to amend the Articles of Confederation, because obviously the Articles of Confederation were not working out so well. So 55 male delegates. George Washington is the unanimous decision to lead the entire meeting, and they need to figure out how to make this government work. And basically, they write all the problems down on paper, and they realize the Articles of Confederation is it's not going to work out. And they need to scrap it, and they need to create a brand new government. And that's what leads to our Constitution that we have today. Now, the issues that go with creating this new Constitution are, as you see on the slide here, they need to figure out how states and people are going to be represented. They need to figure out what the deal is with slavery. What are the trading rules? Is there going to be one leader, multiple leaders? And how will things be passed? What are the voting qualifications, if you will, for how laws and appointees will be passed? So those are the things they have to figure out. All right, you can take a look at this on your own, but let's talk about some of the plans for what these guys come up with. So again, not everybody's on the same page. That leads to two very different plans when it comes to how states will be represented in this new government. There is the side that says we want all states to be represented the same. This is going to be called the New Jersey Plan, okay? And this New Jersey Plan says, okay, everybody's the same, doesn't matter how many people are in your state, doesn't matter how big or small you are, everybody's going to be the same. Well, now the big states, they said, no, we don't like that. What we want to do is we want to have states be represented in this government based off your population. So the New Jersey plan, everybody's the same. Virginia plan says no, bigger states would have more of an advantage in this government. So this is a big debate. What do we do? Well, we actually compromise. Okay, this is actually going to be called the Great Compromise. We take both plans, the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan, and we put them together. And what we call this new branch of government is Congress. Okay, today Congress is made up of two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate, every state gets 2 senators. Doesn't matter how small or big your state is, 2 senators. That would be your New Jersey plan. Then you have the House of Representatives. The amount of representatives your state gets is based off the population within your state. Well, there you go. That's the Virginia plan. So we took both plans, put them together. We call one the Senate, that's the New Jersey plan, one the Virginia plan, or the House of Representatives, and together they're called Congress, the legislative branch of government. Awesome. Okay, that's the Great Compromise. Now, that's one branch. That's the legislative branch. What about the other branches of government? We're going to create an executive branch. Okay, that's going to be your president, vice president, the White House, if you will. And then we're going to have the judicial branch. Okay, that's your judges, Supreme Court, circuit courts, etc. So 3 branches. Those are the people in those 3 branches. And you also need to know what is the purpose of each branch. So the legislative branch, Congress, they write laws. The executive branch, the President, the White House, they execute law or they enforce the law. And then the judicial branch, they interpret the law. Okay, the courts interpret the laws. They have to say, is this case, what would the constitutional people that wrote this, what would they think? How would they rule? That's the job of the Supreme Court. Okay, to determine the constitutionality of laws. Okay, so great compromise. As you can see, we talked about this, the two plans, they become Congress. Got it. What about the issue of slavery? Now, slavery obviously is still going on. Okay, slavery is more popular in the southern regions. As we already talked about, the New England and the middle colonies, now states, slavery is dying out. And the writers of the Constitution, they figured that slavery was on its way out. They said, listen, it's already dying out in the North, in the South, it'll eventually die out. So why don't we give the Southerners what they want and just say that the slavery is protected by the Constitution? And they do, they protect it. They say it's okay. The Southern states say, we have a little bit of an issue though with this new way in which we're representing our people in government. And they say, well, okay, what do you mean? What are you talking about? They said, okay, well, we love this idea, the Virginia plan. We love that, the larger the state, the more people you have in it, and the more House of Representatives you get. The only problem is we don't have a lot of white dudes down in the South. We have more slaves. So they wouldn't exactly have a lot of representatives. They said, hey, can we just count some of those slaves as people? This way we get more representatives. And the North says, no, no way. They're not, citizens. They can't vote. We're not going to allow this. So they come to a compromise, another compromise within a compromise, if you will. And this is called the 3/5 compromise. 3/5 of a state's slaves will be counted towards the population. Why? So that the southern states can get more representatives in the House of Representatives. Okay, so the issue of slavery, okay, is protected, and also some of the slaves are counted towards population. Okay, next up, the commercial compromise. This isn't really touched on too much on the exam. This allows Congress to regulate trade and foreign commerce. This places tariffs or taxes on imports. This is a big one because, as we said in the Articles of Confederation, it was very hard for them to make money. So this allows Congress to be in control of it, allows them to collect taxes and earn some money for the government, which obviously it needed badly. All right, now what about this new president role, okay, the executive branch? There was no such thing like it ever before. And you say, well, why didn't they have a president in the Articles of Confederation? Why did they create such a weak government? Well, think about what type of government we'd broken away from, right? England had a monarchy, a king. They did not want to recreate a monarchy. And so the Articles of Confederation did not have a president role because they didn't want one person in charge. So now, when you're talking about adding a president to this new government, a lot of these guys in the Constitutional Convention, they're very iffy about it. They're very scared. They're very skeptical because they don't want to recreate a monarchy. So they said, if we're going to do this, we have to place limitations on their power. So what are the qualifications to be president? There are only 3 things you need to be in order to be president. 1, you have to be at least 35 years old. 2, you have to be a native-born citizen. And 3, you have had to have lived in the United States the past 14 years. That's it, okay? So you can be president, anybody can be president. It doesn't say you have to be wealthy. It doesn't say you have to be educated. It doesn't say you have to be a military, a veteran, nothing like that, okay? As we've seen, obviously, with our current administration, you can be from a reality TV show. You could be a business, connoisseur. You can be a Harvard, educated person. You could be a military veteran, okay? We've had all those types of presidents. So it's very vague on exactly what you need to be president. Now, speaking with this whole idea, and we're talking about an election, especially in 2020 here, electing the president. How do you become president? So we have something called the Electoral College. And the framers of the Constitution, they purposely made this in order to prevent, um, you know, what they thought at the time, uneducated people from voting, people that didn't deserve to be president. So how does this all work? What is the Electoral College? You can see a map of the United States on the slide right there. And that map there has numbers in each state. Those numbers represent what you call the electoral number, if you will. Okay, so let's look at New York. New York has a number of 31. Where did they get that random number from 31? What they do is they say, how many representatives does New York have? New York has 2 senators and 29 House of Representatives. Add those two together and you get 31. So if I'm running for president, I look at the map of the US here, what states am I going to focus on? Am I going to focus on California or am I going to focus on Delaware? Am I going to focus on New York or am I going to focus on campaigning in West Virginia? The numbers, okay, the higher the number, the more electoral votes you get. So if you're running for president, you want to focus on the bigger states, okay, the ones with a higher electoral number. All right, the magic number is 270. Once you get 270 electoral votes, you become president. All right. And the other question you might have is, well, what about, how do I win that number, let's say? So let's talk about the last election that we've had. Okay, in 2016, we had Donald Trump, the Republican, run against Hillary Clinton, okay, the Democrat. Hillary Clinton won New York. More people in New York had voted for Hillary Clinton. So she won the entire number of 31. She did not share those electoral votes with Donald Trump. She had the entire number. Okay? That's how that works. All right? You must win the Electoral College, 270 electoral votes in order to win the presidency. Okay, so they write this whole Constitution down, and now they have to figure out, okay, how are we going to ratify or pass it? So basically, 9 out of the 13 states had to ratify the Constitution in order for it to go into effect. Obviously, they do, and the brand new United States Constitution is born. Where do we get the ideas for our Constitution? Just to draw back to some of our earlier chapters, we get ideas from the Enlightenment, we get ideas from the Iroquois tribe, their ideas of democracy and constitution writing, Locke, Montesquieu. Okay, those guys came up with ideas that we incorporate in our government today. So one of the big ideas that Montesquieu came up with in particular is called separation of powers. The 3 branches of government that we spoke about, they must not have more power than the other. They share power, okay? You separate all the power in the government and they can all have equal amount of power. They all have special powers to check one another. So, for example, the president doesn't pass laws, okay? What if Donald Trump wants to make a law that says there should be a McDonald's in every street corner in America? He can't do that. Okay, just because he is the president doesn't mean he has the authority to make laws. Whatever he says has to be, whatever law he wants has to be written by Congress. Congress doesn't want to write that law, they're not going to write it. And then even after they write a law, it has to be interpreted by the Supreme Court. So there's a process that goes into our government. So if you're not happy with the administration, the president, if you're not happy with your representatives, there are ways to get around things from happening. And that's the way the framers of the Constitution purposely set this up. Okay, checks and balances allows each branch to check one another. Okay, even if one branch is out of line, they do something crazy, their actions are checked by the other branches. That's how they share power equally. Now, power in our government is also divided into 3 levels. So there are 3 levels of government. There's the federal government, that's the highest authority. Okay, that's Washington, D.C. Then you have state governments, okay, that each state has their own government, like New York State, obviously, and our capital is in Albany. And then the local level, okay, the local representation, and that for us would be town of Islip. So why do they do this? Well, because, the White House, the president, does not have the time to read every little request and action going on in every town throughout America. If we want a new streetlight on 3rd Avenue in Brentwood, we're not going to have the president read about that issue of ours. That would go to the town of Islip, okay? And so that's something, it allows government to run more smoothly, okay? The levels of government. Okay, this is called federalism. Federalism, like I said, means the different levels, the 3 levels of government, makes things run smoother, okay? Just like we would not be sending our Suffolk County legislator to, China to negotiate a trade deal on behalf of the United States. That is a job for the federal government. So speaking about checks and balances, let's talk more about this. This is a great little lesson here. If we were in a class, I would love to show you this video called, Bill sitting on Capitol Hill. If you have time, 2 minutes, type it in on YouTube. Bill sitting on Capitol Hill, and you'll see a video that's very elementary, but also very awesome in the sense of what it teaches us. So what is a bill? A bill is something that Congress writes, okay? Let's go with the example I used before. People in America, they want more McDonald's. They want a McDonald's in every street corner of America. And so enough people get their representatives to write a bill. Okay, the bill says we want that McDonald's every street corner of America. Congress, okay, they read this, they say we agree, they vote on it, they all pass it, they sign it, and they send it to the president. Now the president can say, yes, we're going to do this, and it becomes a law. Or if the president doesn't like this idea, they can veto it, okay? And when you veto it, it goes back down to Congress. So now the question is, well, wait, that's not a very good idea, because what if the president doesn't like any of Congress's ideas? They'll never get anything past him, or her, I should say. So Congress, even though the president had vetoed a bill by them, it goes back down to Congress and they can re-vote. If Congress re-votes and 2/3 of both houses of Congress say yes, the bill can still become a law. Okay, they can get around that executive branch. Okay, so it doesn't always rely upon the president. Okay, and this is good. This is a good thing because it allows, each of the branches to have their own say, to have their own agenda, and get things done. Okay, without the approval of the others. So okay, and that leads us now to another example of checks and balances. This one particularly about the president and the Supreme Court. So the president, okay, has the power to appoint officials and federal judges. So for example, as of recent, one of our Supreme Court justices has passed away, Ruth Ginsburg, and she is going to be replaced by someone that the president is going to appoint. And not talking about all the controversy and stuff that goes along with that. Whoever the president chooses, okay, whoever that person will be, they have to be approved by Congress. Okay, so they can't just be, someone out of thin air. If our president wants to choose their best friend still has to be approved by Congress. Okay, so it's not exactly, almighty power, if you will. What else? President can negotiate treaties with other countries, but the Senate must approve those treaties, and Congress can remove a president if they think they have violated rules. That's also an example. In recent times, we've seen that. That's called impeachment. So speaking about the president breaking rules, okay, that leads us to talking about impeachment. What does that mean? If president is impeached, it does not mean they are removed from the presidency. You guys just lived through one impeachment. Donald Trump was impeached. However, if you're with me right now, he's still president. What does impeachment mean? Impeachment means the president, just like all of us, if they break the rules, they break the law, they are brought to court. They're put on trial. And the president was put on trial, okay? And if they win the impeachment case, they remain president, like Donald Trump. If they lose, then they are removed from the presidency. Okay, so just be careful. Just because you're impeached does not mean you are no longer president. Okay, here are three presidents at the bottom here who had been impeached. Andrew Johnson, we'll talk about why. Richard Nixon, you may have an idea why. And Bill Clinton, also impeached. No sitting president has been impeached and lost. We'll talk about those individual cases throughout the year and see what happens to them and see if they win or lose. So, anything else? The president does appoint judges, as we said, must be approved by Congress. Congress can remove judges if they misbehave. Again, just more examples of checks and balances. This is all in our Constitution. The Constitution is a living, breathing document. No, it doesn't mean that it drinks Gatorade and has dinner every day at 4 o'clock. It means that it is still in effect today. It's flexible and it still lives because of the way we wrote it. So how is it still around today? We'll have to find out in a little bit what makes it still breathe and live today. How has it lasted the test of time? Before we get to that, though, let's talk about the people that are for the Constitution and against the Constitution. So the Constitutional Convention, they write down all these laws and the way the government's going to be set up. And the people that are for this new Constitution, we're going to call them Federalists. Guys like John Adams, George Washington, James Madison, Hamilton, John Jay. Some of those names should sound familiar. And they are pro-Constitution. Okay, and they're going to write the Federalist Papers, which promotes the Constitution. The other side of the coin are guys like the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists, they are not for the Constitution because they believe too much power is being given to the federal government. So they are scared that we're recreating a monarchy. They say, the Anti-Federalists, that there's no mention of individuals' rights. So they basically push for something called the Bill of Rights. They said, listen, if the Constitution is going to be ratified, we need the Bill of Rights in order to pass this Constitution. Okay, and we'll talk about the Bill of Rights in a few moments. So it goes through. Okay, the Constitution is ratified by 1790, and we have a new government. The first election is held in 1789, as we all probably, hopefully, know. Good old G. Dubs is our first president. Now, the way it worked back then was if you lose the election, you become the vice president. So John Adams, he lost the election. Not that it was like a surprise. Everybody knew George Washington was going to be president. He becomes the first vice president. Our first Congress had 59 representatives, and the Senate had 22 senators. Congress met in New York City. That was where our first nation's capital was, okay, in New York City. We'll talk about why it moves later on. All right, what about amendments? What if we need to amend or change the Constitution? Can we do that? Yes, we've done it 27 times. Now, it's only been 27 because it's not exactly an easy process. 2/3 of both houses in Congress have to approve an amendment, or 2/3 of the states can request an amendment. All right, so it's very hard, it's very difficult to get many states or representatives on board with an amendment. So we have done it, like I said, 27 times. The very first 10 are called the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights are what the Anti-Federalists wanted added to the Constitution because it ensures our basic civil liberties as citizens. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to own a gun, no soldiers, being quartered in our homes, which makes sense, right? Because the Revolution, we talked about the Quartering Act. Your right to due process and having a lawyer at court, things like that. Those are your basic rights that fall within the first 10 amendments, okay, the Bill of Rights. Okay, and this is exactly what we we're just talking about. Okay, so let's finish up this chapter by talking about what makes the Constitution flexible. There are a couple of things that make this Constitution survive the test of time. So first off, the elastic clause. And if you know what elastic does in like your gym shorts or your sweatpants, elastic expands, contrasts. And there's an elastic clause in the Constitution that says Congress can make all necessary and proper laws, which makes them or gives them the power to essentially make any law that they need to. So, for example, could the framers of the Constitution, could they foresee things happening in the future, like child labor? No, they had no idea that was going to be an issue. So, how can they make a law to ban child labor? Well, the elastic clause gives them the power to do so. Next, we talked about this earlier, the amendment process. So, amending the Constitution, altering or changing it, that allows them to um, the Constitution to withstand the test of time. Next, judicial interpretation. So the Supreme Court, when they rule on cases, that means they are interpreting the Constitution whichever way they intend to, and what they rule becomes the law of the land. So if they say gay marriage is legal, gay marriage is legal. Okay, you can't say no, it's not. If they say integration of schools is legal, integration of schools is legal. Okay, must follow it. Finally, the unwritten Constitution. This is more like your customs, traditions. A big custom or tradition would be the two-term presidency. Like George Washington, he served 2 terms, and it was understood that you do not break that tradition. Now, there will be a president who does that, and we'll have to see why that happens later on in history. But for now, that's our example for the unwritten Constitution. Okay. Lastly, speaking about the presidency, the president can't do things on his own, and so the president must have advisors. His or her top advisors are going to be called the president's cabinet. And Washington puts this together because he realizes that he needs, important and smart people around him to make decisions. Okay, this was a precedent set by good old G-Dubs. All right, so that's just the side note. All right, everything else, okay, we've talked about here. So hopefully this video was helpful. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you, enjoyed it, please give me a like or subscribe. Other than that, have a wonderful rest of your day.